All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of today's conversation. Thank you for tuning in. This is going to be a great opportunity for us to talk about just the state of our world, what is going on as far as government, voting, the things we need to consider when it comes to politics. And I'm so excited because I have my big brother Ted here, who, whenever I think of anything that's politics related, he is who I'm going to go to. So, for this conversation, this is definitely a open forum. If you have questions, if you have things that you would like for me to ask him, put it in the comments. We have some set things we're going to discuss, but again, I want everyone uh, questions and thoughts to be shared as well. And so we're gonna just jump right in. As you see the title today is State of Emergency. Your voice, your vote, your life. When we were trying to come up with a title, we was like, what can press the importance of right now? And so hopefully this title has grabbed your attention and you understand why we have to have this conversation. So first, before I even jump into my questions, I would love to hear whatever is on the top of your mind right now. You can kick us off.
Sure. So first of all, Dreamer, thank you so much for having me. I was trying to share this, but I don't know if I don't know. Can you share it for me? Is that would
Yeah,
you
I
be able
got
to do
you.
that?
While you
Okay,
talking, I'll be sharing it.
beautiful. Okay. So I'm first of all, I guess I should introduce myself to your audience. Everybody maybe
Yeah,
doesn't
go
know who I
ahead.
am. I'm Ted Williams, and I'm Dreamer's big brother, adopted big brother here. Very happy, very proud of the work that she's doing over at Burst in the Books and with her teaching and that sort of thing, the community work. I'm super excited and super proud of her. I teach political science for a living in the City College in Chicago. I run the social sciences program at Kennedy King College. Have been doing that for some time now. I'm a former candidate for the Ninth Ward in the city of Chicago. I've written a couple books. Used to host a TV show on politics for WYCC, and yeah, and so I love all things political. It's exciting, a very exciting voting season, and so I am excited and yet I'm concerned, right? As many people are, because what we have to understand is that America likes to claim that it is the greatest democracy in the world, and yet voter turnout is drastically low, and we should be concerned about it. So, in presidential elections, which we're in right now, about 55% of people come out. Sometimes there's a little higher, we get into the low 60s, but the average is about 55%. But in midterm elections that are non presidential elections, only about a third of people come out. It's about 33% of people come out. And this election is so important, not only because of what's at the top of the ticket, and this particular president and what I believe he means for this country, what I believe he means for our future, what I think he means for a lot of issues that are important to me. But also, it's important to know that we've got a lot of other offices that are up for election at the local level, and so really, we've got to consider that in America we have 50 different elections and 50 different state approaches to elections. And
Mm.
so it is critical that you understand what's happening at the top of the ticket, but it's also critical you understand what's happening down ballot as well. And I want to talk a little about that tonight and some things we can do to kind of really make sure that we are aware and educated and empowered and ready to go for this very important election.
So we just gonna jump right in. My very first question is next week. How do we prepare for November 3rd? Like what should be the top of mind things that we're thinking about in preparation for that day?
Yeah, so a lot of people, a lot of organizations, and I'm really happy about this. There are a lot of drives around the city, the state, the nation around voter registration, getting people to vote. I just read something today where they are using basketball arenas now, Houston Rockets and
Mm.
some other places, for voter registration, which is phenomenal. But very few people talk about voter education. And I think education is as important as registration because many people go into the polls not knowing anything about what they're voting for or who they're voting for. They literally play a game of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. They look and they go, I don't know who these judges are, but I'll pick somebody anyway. This person sounds like a woman. This person, sounds like somebody that's from my ethnicity. Eeny, meeny. I saw a commercial before I saw a sign. Somebody handed me a flyer. Guys, this is
Mhm.
crazy. When I ran for office, I ran for the Ninth Ward Alderman. in the city of Chicago, which is the southwest side of the southeast side of the city, about 87th Street to the north, 130th Street to the south, Halsted to the west, and about Cottage Grove to the east. I ran for alderman, and we were literally convincing people the morning of the election to vote for us outside of the polls. People walking up to the polls to vote had no idea what they were doing. So, the most powerful thing that you can do for this election is to educate yourself. And in the year 2020, there are a plethora of resources that we can use. There's so much information out here about candidates, about issues, and so it's very critical. So the first thing that I would do, and I tell people this a lot, is get yourself a sample ballot.
Mm.
Go to the Board of Elections website, the Chicago Board of Elections website you can use. There are also independent groups like Ballot Ready, which I find to have a great sample ballot, ballotready.org. Go on the website. Then what you do from there is you can type in your address. They will give you a sample ballot. It will lay out who's running at the federal level, who's running at the local level, who's running at the state level for you, for where you live. And then you will see there are ballot questions there as well. So in politics, we live in what's called a republic or a representative democracy. We vote on people to convey our issues,
Yeah.
but we also can vote directly on ballot measures. So, for instance, the state of Illinois has on the ballot a question about whether we should remove the flat tax or go to what's called a fair tax. And a flat tax is 1% across the board. A fair tax would increase that percentage based on your income. That's a huge issue because if we do that, we will go into the majority of states. 32 states right now use the progressive or fair tax. We would become one of those if we decide this in November. There also will be a ballot measure in the city of Chicago whether people should have access to broadband internet. That should be equal access across the board. Whether we should limit the kinds of guns, whether we should limit assault rifles in the state of Illinois or in the city of Chicago, particularly, and questions like that. Now, unfortunately, those questions are not binding in Illinois, meaning that when they get voted on, they don't become a law automatically. Um, but they convey public sentiment. And with the fair tax situation, that's a little bit different because it would be moving us towards opening up the Constitution and then potentially having a constitutional amendment. So the point is educate yourself. Educate yourself. Educate yourself. Spend time. People died for our right to vote. It's worth an hour of your time to prepare before you go in.
I love it. So what I want us to do right now, we have people that are adding and adding. I need you to share this. Share this live on your page, everyone who's watching. So it increases the number of people who are getting this information. Again, we are in a time where this is not optional, whether we should be voting, whether we should know about what's going on in our own city and the nation. And the reason we're having this forum, I know I had a few people who asked me, calls like they love them, and why do we do it? The reason we do it is because it matters. As I'm an educator and I do things in the community, the politics impact my level of influence in the city. Right? Do the families I serve get the resources they need? Do the schools that I'm working with have the resources they need? All these different things are crucial for us to be able to do our great work in the city. And so if it impacts the kids and the families in the community that I serve, then that's why I'm having a conversation about it. So please, if you are watching this, share it. It takes nothing but 5 seconds, and we're going to continue the conversation. So, Ted, let me ask you, and I know Ken, when it comes to voting for people, we can't give our opinion whether you should vote for this person or vote for that person. But even with that tax question, why is that going to help the city of Chicago, whether we pick the flat or the progressive?
Flat of the fair tax, right? So,
Fair
right. So currently, what we have in the city of Chicago um, would be if we were to move to a fair tax, it would up the rate on basically 3% of the state population. 3% of the state would see their taxes go up, those who make over $250,000 a year. 97% of people would not see their taxes go up. Well, why is it important that we have enough taxes to deal with? We have a huge unfunded pension liability in the state. We have major issues around population loss in the state of Illinois. Cook County lost more people than any county in America in the last 5 years in terms of population. So unfortunately, we have less people who have to be taxed higher, unfortunately, in order to pay for it. But the fair tax does not tax those at the bottom; it taxes those at the top. And what I would say is that America, we have. I just did a video on this a couple hours ago. We have a situation where those who are most likely to be able to pay, those who benefit from the system the most, are paying the least amount of taxes in America. And that is because they have lawyers and they have lobbyists who create situations where they get tax loopholes and they get around it. Our president, and listen, I know this is for you, and I got to be careful, I know, but look, I don't have any kind of hang up about what I got to say and what I want to say. So if anybody gets
I
mad
got
about
to take up
you,
either.
okay,
I
so I mean,
shoot it from the hip. Let's get it.
okay. Okay. So our current president, right? Our current president has bragged about not paying taxes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I said in this video a little earlier, the average American pays almost $10,000 a year in taxes. They only making $78,000. Our president claimed to make $435 million in 2018 and paid $700 in taxes, and the 10 years before that paid nothing in taxes. Amazon made $9 billion last year, was responsible for closing 30% of all retail stores in this country, did not pay a red cent in taxes. So what I'm saying is that we have our priorities out of whack. And I think that this fair tax would move us closer towards having equality on the tax system. Now, don't get it twisted. There will be enemies around this. Big businesses do not want to see their tax rates go up. So they're going to say, oh my goodness, business is going to leave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they're going to leave anyway if we don't have public safety, if we don't have public services. And where do you think that money comes from? It comes from our taxes.
Man. So again, like you said, it's pretty much these corporations who are making billions of dollars who aren't giving back to the people that's spending in their companies in the first place, right? So
Yeah.
when we think about Chicago politics, okay, um, and we're leading to some other conversations. But are there people, are there roles, are there things we should be considering when it comes to Chicago politics that's coming up on November 30th? I know
Yeah.
we talked about the law side, but what about actual positions?
Sure. So um, there are a number of positions that are up for election right now that people are not thinking about, that they're not worried about. Let me help you understand. We are in a census year, which is critical because, as you know, you've done something on the
Yeah.
census where the amount of representation could, helps us to understand where the funds ought to be going in the first place.
Yep. Census
So,
ends December 30th, y'all. Do the census.
absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Which, by the way, our president worked to cut off the time of the census to move the deadline back to actually have less time than what was legally put forth at first. See, what you have to understand, and I'll get into Chicago in 1 second here, but there's been a massive campaign of voter suppression. Actually, I'll hang on to that. We can do that question later. But there's been a massive campaign historically, currently, locally, and nationally to keep people from voting. So we'll talk about that one later. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what's on the ballot in the city of Chicago? As I told you, there are 4 referendum questions. A referendum is a direct question on the ballot that the people get to answer. But in addition to that, think about this. People don't even realize this. We have a Illinois Supreme Court justice vacancy that people aren't even talking about that we'll be voting on for this. The county clerk, Cook County clerk, is up for reelection. The Cook County state's attorney is up for reelection. We are voting on representatives on the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District Board. And so, if you don't think water matters, ask the people in Flint, Michigan about water and how much water matters there. So these
Yep.
things are important at the local level. Then we have our state reps who are up for every 2 years. They're up right now. Many of us have state senators that are up right now. They rotate in terms of how they're up for election. But those folks at the local level go to Springfield and they make decisions about your area and about the state on issues like education funding, which is a state priority. Education is funded at the state level, not at the federal level. Only 4% of the federal budget goes to education. The state's responsible for it. Gun laws are done at the state level. Issues of family policy, abortion, all these other things done at the state level. Marriage laws, for the most part, are done at the state level, with the exception of the federal case that just happened. Um, environmental protections, all these things are done at the state and local level. Transportation,
Mhm.
housing, sewage, those sorts of things. So when you vote on your state rep and when you vote on your state senator, you vote on your water reclamation district commissioner and that kind of thing, you're voting on whether you're going to have clean water in your community. A politician will sign your birth certificate and your death certificate. So politics will impact you whether you care about politics or not.
Mm. And I think just hearing that, I mean, it is just so important we understand. I think a lot of times in our nation, which we will get to, there's so many things happening, so much civil unrest. There's so many things in our local communities. I can tell you about even in my neighborhood, our progression, just the tons of things that need to happen in this space, right? But it starts with us caring about all the entities that control our day in and living situations. Water, right? As you just shared. Very simple, but yet it is a very powerful thing. And it's also understanding who owns and who runs those entities. So when we think about Chicago politics, and I'm asking for myself as well, because I know you hit on it. Um, when we think about reform and really pushing change, and we got protests and things happening, what are some of the roles, and again, this is educating Jarima as well, that we should be really concerned about when it comes to what's going to change our city? Because I think so many times we're so only big about like the big officials, like the president, uh, the mayor in some cases, right? But I don't even think so much that, a lot of people just didn't like Rahm Emanuel. But I think just really knowing the ins and outs of that role, like
Right.
who are people who are getting passes, because we really don't even know that they actually are probably part of the problem that we need to be
Yeah.
more informed about.
So I think when you think about the American system of government, very simplistic, go back to fourth grade. Three branches of government: legislative branch makes laws, executive branch enforces the laws, judicial branch interprets the laws. We spend a lot of time talking about the executive branches: the mayor, the governor, the president. And they're important because they drive an agenda. But the legislators at the city, state, and federal level are there way beyond the time that the executives are there for the most part.
Mhm.
Right? You've got legislators who've been in office for 30, 40 years. Mike Madigan down in Springfield is one of them. Heck, Joe Biden was in office for 40 years, right? On city level, Ed Burke has been in office for close to that amount of time, and they really drive the agenda of the city. But I would suggest that the judicial branch, which is probably the least well known branch, it is
Mm.
the branch that when we go to the polls, we have no idea who these judges are whatsoever, at all, in any way, shape, or form. And there's information on how we do those, how we find out about them as well. But I would suggest that because they interpret the law, they may be the last step on the train of checks and balances. And so, in many ways, the judicial branch is most powerful, and yet we know little about them. The Cook County State's Attorney is up for election, Kim Fox, right? And when you think about the power that she has to prosecute, whether it be the police, prosecute, offenders of, big public names who are ripping people off at large levels and that sort of thing, that power is extremely important. And the judicial branch, even during the civil rights movement, was probably the most
Mhm.
significant place that they were winning battles. The Brown versus Board of Education. This was not a piece of legislation. This was a piece of interpretation by the
Yep.
Supreme Court that said the separate but equal schools were not valid. Well, as you look at the national level right now, you got the Supreme Court. It's a big deal right now because those judges can make decisions that last for a lifetime. So to answer your question again, what should we be looking at the local level? We ought to be looking at the state's attorney's race. We ought to be looking at the county commissioner, the water district, the water reclamation district folks. We ought to be looking at some of those positions because, well, water reclamation district is not in the judicial branch, but the county state's attorney office is. And when I say that the interpretation of the law is so vital, it is so critical. People don't understand it, but they've got to know. So I would say if we ought to be looking at anything, particularly in our situation right now where people are recognizing the lack of justice that happens across this nation, If you've got a good chief prosecutor in office, they're going to go after the bad folks and try to protect those who need help. And they're going to, by doing that, ensure justice. And that's what I would be looking at if I,
I
by
love
the
it.
time.
And I think even as you see, I put up the court system in Black Lives. I think a reason I brought this up is, as we know, so many things happen across our nation. Breonna Taylor, we got all these other cases, which I would love to know. You know how certain things are like mainstream, but all of a sudden it shuts down. Like we haven't heard much talking about like George Floyd, talking about Jacob Blake. You know, reality. It's like we have to have our priorities at certain. Like okay, right now she's the highlight, but what about everybody else? You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
what would you say, even in those instances, like Ahmaud Aubrey? I mean, it's so many names, right? That we have protests, that we have rallies about. But what do you know, like the development of those cases? Like, is it just simply outrage, or is there, I would love for us to just be alive and aware of what's happening with the court system and these Black lives, like the connection between the two.
So there has been a long battle in America between states' rights and federal rights.
Mm.
And most of the prosecutions that we're talking about are being done at the state level. But when they rise to the level of federal crimes, this is why hate crime legislation is so important. Because if you can prove a hate crime in the George Floyd situation, if you can prove a hate crime in the Jacob Blake situation, Breonna Taylor, I also want to talk about a young man, Jamel. I can't think of Jamel's last name, but from Dalton, just a few years ago here in Chicago, who was and I actually knew him from the church that we were a part of in Dalton back a few years ago. This young man was a security officer and was at a working security at a club out in, I want to say, Robbins or something like that. And the police came. There was a big fight, and the police came and they ended up shooting him, right, as a security guard. And here's a young man, never got justice. And it was so funny. I was talking to someone about this today, and I asked them what happened to his case. Right, his case is like 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old. What happened to his case? And he was like, well, I haven't heard anything because we have a short attention span in this country. We have a
Mm.
short attention span when it comes to issues of justice. We see these things in the news, and God forbid someone doesn't tape the crime, because if it's not taped, if it ain't on tape, people have no chance of getting justice in many ways. But if it's taped, at least we have a shot at this, right? So, but even with that, the states are responsible for prosecuting these folks. That's why the Kentucky Attorney General is such a problem in this situation, because he has the power of the legal resources in the state and will not use it to hold the police accountable, which is unconscionable to me, right? And it doesn't matter what people's color is in this scenario, right? This person's African American, but you have to have the interest of the community at heart, no matter who you are. And he obviously does not in this situation. And so the problem is that the states are dealing with this. They rise to the level of federal attention, but unless they are rising to the level of having sort of the prosecutorial powers for the federal government, i.e., hate crimes, etc., most of these cases are just dealt with at the state level, and then we don't hear about them for months or years at a time. In the Breonna Taylor case, which I think is so tragic, the the state, I believe it's the state or the city, I can't remember which entity, but they paid their family like $12 million.
Exactly.
So if they're not guilty or culpable, why are
Why
they
are you
paying them?
paying me?
Anyway,
Exactly.
so yeah, I
Wow.
digress. Yeah.
And I think it goes about, so this is why voting is so important. And the reason we want to have this platform is because what's happening right now is also a level of voter suppression. Okay. And I think a lot of times we are not aware of things that we should be making sure is in order, that's in check, so that come next week, you're not hindered in some way for exercising your right and sharing your voice. And so we had a conversation one day after church, and what was a very like valid question someone brought up about, like, what about licenses? Right? We've got these passes on tickets and all these extensions, but what if someone's license is expired? They haven't been able to get to DMV. It's the day of voting. Are they going to allow them to vote? right?
Right.
Even though I'm not gonna get a ticket, but are you gonna allow me to exercise my right? So are
Yeah.
there, I mean, that's just one example, and we, kind of uncovered that, and I would love for you to share more to it. But what are other examples of like voter suppression that people should be aware of?
So let's take a step back into history for a moment. Uh, when the 15th Amendment was passed and African Americans received the right to vote um, in the early 1870s, this right was oftentimes, even though it existed on paper, was negated because of additional laws that were put on the books to make barriers to people being able to vote. So just think about this for a second. Historically, the way to knock people out from voting is not to outright say you don't have the right to vote. What has been done is with literally surgical precision,
Mm,
this nefarious um, sort of push to keep certain people from being able to vote by putting additional barriers. So, what existed historically? Poll taxes existed. You get the money, you can pay, you can vote. You don't have the money, you can't vote. A grandfather clause historically: if your
right.
grandfather could vote, you can vote. If your grandfather can't vote, you can't vote. A jelly bean test historically: look and count the number of jelly beans in a jar. If you got it, you can vote. If not, you cannot vote. Right? A literacy test. All of these were historic, ostensibly violating and discriminatory acts that have not died.
Mm,
And that's the scariest part of this story today. What is going on today that knocks people off the rolls? Let me give you a couple of examples. In 2018, 550,000 residents of Illinois were purged from the voter rolls because of exact match name standards, i.e., if your voter registration if you are a felon, for instance, well, not in Illinois, felons can vote, but if you don't have the exact name match standards. So if your name is John Smith and you put on your driver's license as John J. Smith, and you wrote somewhere John Smith, it can knock you off from voting. Okay. Georgia is notorious for this. When the Stacey Abrams race happened, there was something like, I think, 700,000 people were knocked off the rolls during that race, and the majority of them were people of color,
mm,
right? So that's exact match standards that still happen across the country. The use it or lose it laws. In Ohio, if you don't vote in every election, you can lose your right to vote. They go back and they go, well, you didn't vote in 2016, so you have to either renew that or your right to vote does not exist for this election. This is happening all across the country. Ohio is notorious for this. Voter registration itself suppresses voter turnout. Why should we have to register to vote as American citizens? Why should we not just be able to, because we have a social security number, be able to vote wherever we are? We are US citizens, right? So, voter registration, the cumbersome process of registering to vote, we just recently, in the last decade, in many states, have made it so that there is same day voter registration. Many states didn't even have that. It's state to state. So now you go in, right? 10 years ago, you went in, and in many states, even ours included, you go in and you're not able to register to vote on the same day. We just put early voting in the last decade.
yeah.
Prior to that, if you could not get off of work on election day and not stand in the lines for an hour on election day and not stand and face the cold on election day, because we do elections in November and February in Chicago when it's freezing outside, particularly in February, you could not vote. So I'll give you one last example on this. So all these things are happening, but I'll give
Yeah.
you one last example. In the state of Florida, close to 800,000 felons were granted the right to vote by a constitutional amendment. The Republicans in the state, and I'm going to say, call a spade, right? The Republicans in the state went to court after that 2018 constitutional amendment was passed and said, oh, shoot, these people are now going to vote. Now we're going to make it so you can only vote if you pay off all of your fines. That was not a part of the constitutional amendment. So now you got people that owe $50,000, $20,000, $8,000, $5,000. They may not have it at all. Close to 800,000 were not able to vote. Blessedly, Michael Bloomberg, John Legend, other folks came in recently, raised $20 million so that these felons could have the right to vote. What the Republicans do in Florida, they then tried to now sue to say that Bloomberg is buying votes. Their argument is that by paying these people's fines, you are paying for their vote. Common sense tells you they're not paying for a vote. Exactly. They're paying for people's opportunity to participate in the system, and those people can vote however they want. And here's what I'll say in closing about this. Why would you want to limit somebody's right to vote? Anybody that is on the side of limiting people's rights to vote, that is a person that is on the wrong side of history. And unfortunately, not that I think the Democrats are the greatest party in the world or whatever, but in recent history, there has been one side that has worked heavily to deny people the access to vote. And what you recognize is that when people who have not registered to vote start registering, and people who have been denied access start getting access, most of those people are voting on one side of the aisle. And that scares the other side of the aisle. And that's why they do it. We have to be diligent because voter suppression still exists. I have another example, but I'll just be quiet because I get worked up about this.
Give it to us. What's another example?
Well, think about this. In the 2016 election, I think the president's, the race, to talk about the what happened. The president of the United States won this race for 3 reasons, I believe. And those were not good reasons. Number one, the proven Russian interference in the election. Verifiable. Multiple agencies said, Facebook, they were buying ads to freak people out and to manipulate groups and change the narrative and put out false information. This is verifiable. You cannot take that away. Pushing towards one side of the aisle, i.e. that the current president will be elected. Number 2, the FBI came out with this false email story that was never proven to be real a few weeks before the election. Never happened before. Does not, they began to investigate. They didn't find anything. And that changed the game around the election. But last but not least, back to voter suppression. State of Michigan. Record numbers of Black people were either denied access to vote, purged from the rolls, and or were in situations where they were trying to vote and the machines were broken, the lines were extremely long, and this was surgical precision, I told you, because they know in this country that certain people vote for certain parties. So if you can knock those folks out, you win. And that's what's going on, and that is what we have to stand against in 2020.
Ooh-wee. I think it's so much we can talk about. I have one more thing to discuss. For those who are watching, again, share this recording. As much as we're able to educate and inspire this conversation, the better decision making we make. A lot of times we just follow the crowd or whatever is speaking the loudest. A lot of times it's not necessarily what's best for us and our family and our community. And so I really urge you, if you're just now turning in, to go back to the beginning, watch what we talked about, get that ballot, learn who are the people, learn about what's in the state, especially for Illinois. The last thing I want to talk about is policy reform. And this is more so because I have questions, and I'm sure people watching have questions. So we see these laws, we see these policies, and we just know that they are just, they're racist, right? Like they clearly are targeting to certain people in America. Even when it comes to school systems, there's policies we don't agree with, we think should change. When it comes to government, city policies we don't agree with. But as the everyday citizen, what power do we have to reform? Is it just simply voting? Am I able to gather people together and we actually get a policy that could be passed? What is our power when it comes to seeing these bogus laws and policies? What do we need to do in order to actually, I think people can say like, okay, my vote doesn't matter because they feel like once I put my name in now, but is there additional things that we can do that can also further a new agenda that impacts so many people?
So, in a representative democracy, the word democracy is a Greek word, comes from a Greek word meaning demos and kratos, right? Demos means the people, kratos means rule. In a demos kratos, it is the people that run the folks in office.
Hmm.
When I ran for office, our good buddy out in Roseland, organizer Joyce Chapman,
Yes.
used to always tell me, Ted, if we put you in office, we can take you out,
Hmm.
right? The people who put you in can take you out. You work for them. So those who are even frustrated with the political process, I get it, right? I get people frustrated with the electoral college. People are frustrated with the voting process. I understand that. But election day is only the beginning. There's so much more work that has to be done after election day. What can you do? There are lots and lots of ways to be engaged, right, in the political process. I think there was this story about the French Revolution where they stormed the Bastille or whatever, and they were, you got some folks who were at the front door charging with like knives and stuff like that, and then there are other people who are kind of pushing them, supporting them. Then other people back, who are making food or whatever, and everybody has a role to play. So you might be the person that goes down to Springfield once a year or twice a year and advocates and lobbies and tells the politicians you're going to vote for this new school in my neighborhood or we're going to vote you out. Or you might be the person that writes a letter. Or you might be the person that signs a petition consistently. Hey, I really want to see this piece of legislation passed that's being supported by this organization. There's some wonderful organizations, by the way, that are doing the work. I would get hooked up to one of them because they can help you to navigate. And once they create sort of these campaigns, you can just get involved and say, okay, well, I'll send something, right? I'll do something. I got this group that just called me yesterday. Hey, are you willing to call voters in swing states to help for the presidential race? I'm like, sure, I will. They've organized it, made it simple, got the phone lines. All I got to do is get the number, call up, and say, hey, you're in a swing state. You can do that. So that's the kind of thing that I'm going to do, and all of us can do, right? It doesn't take much time, but those are things that we can do. On top of that, we as people can create legislation.
Hmm.
The referendum process, if you get enough signatures, you can create a question on the ballot. And that question on the ballot can then be pushed forward and voted on by the entire state. So that's another way that you can get engaged and you can push an agenda. But I think, let me say this, I am a believer that politicians, more often than not, follow the trends and the waves of the time. So if you are organizing and you are pushing, politicians are not saying Black Lives Matter because they've led on this issue. Politicians are saying Black Lives Matter because the streets are saying Black Lives Matter. And the organizers are saying that. And so they go, well, what can we do to be a part of this? So never discount, as Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's what we do. The three M's of politics: money, media, and mobilization. If you can raise money, you can influence folks. If you can get access to media, you can influence folks. If you can get people mobilized, you can influence folks. And those are the things that common people have the power to do that you don't have to necessarily be a public official to make that kind of change.
Wow. I love it. So my next question is, and this may be like a case by case thing, how long should you, so for instance, the election is next Tuesday. How far in advance should you be putting together petitions and trying to get names so that that question can be on the ballot? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
what is like the timeline of things?
Yeah, so you're gonna be looking at you're gonna be looking at, let's say it's 2020. You want to get a question on the ballot for 2022 or 2024, you want to start now. You know what I mean? Nothing in politics happens quickly. You gotta, just as if you were running for office, there are deadlines in terms of signatures and that sort of thing. So I know when I ran, our election was in March of 2015, and our signatures were due, I believe, in November or so of 2015 or 2014. So, so you're looking at a few months ahead of the actual election. Actually, it may have been even sooner than that, if I'm not mistaken. So the point is that yeah, you're gonna have to organize and work. But once again, a lot of organizations out here, a lot of progressive organizations out here doing the work, have the relationships with legislators. They just need labor. They need people. They need people to go down to Springfield. And they go down to Springfield all the time. And I think that to me is the kind of thing that you do if you're looking, how do I get it started? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can get engaged with wonderful organizations. There's I can't even think of many off the top of my head. I work with Operation Push, and I work with a Illinois group for voting reform or something like that, and a couple other groups like that. A couple student groups, my union that I'm a part of, they do a lot of organizing. I'm part of the IFT AFT union, so those are ways to do it.
So we have covered so much, and I feel like there's so much more we can talk about. And I think what I would love for closing remarks is that you're going to be speaking on quite a few different platforms. And so I think that these conversations, like this, won't be the last time people can learn and talk and engage. And even if you have questions, put them in the comments. We'll both see it. We can answer it later. But what would be, so I want you to think about what would be like the major takeaways you want people to get from this talk. And then I would love for you to make your closing remarks to share where else people can learn more and follow you. And I have to kind of all of your different handles. But what would be your closing remarks for us to walk away from this?
So I think I am a person of faith. I tell people this all the time. And I think the key to being a person of faith is that I am endowed with a tremendous sense of hope, and that we have to be hopeful. If we don't have hope, what do we have, right? There have been psychological studies that have shown that people can suffer tremendous amounts of pain and heartache when they have hope, when they have something to believe in. And so for me, it is important that we have hope. America has been a place full of injustice, a place full of discrimination, a place full of genocide and slavery and all kinds of police brutality and inequity economically. But also on paper, the principles are very good. And so my hope is, as Dr. King's hope was that we would hold America accountable to what it says on paper.
Mm.
And as long as we have that in front of us, we keep on going. Justice may not come when we believe it should and come in large waves, but they say that what is the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So you get small victories where you can, right? Um, and that's what we do. So I am choosing to be hopeful. We all take a day or two or week or month of mourning after we see another case of someone like Breonna Taylor who is killed in an extrajudicial fashion due to no fault of her own. They're trying to malign her character now. Even if, as I've said many times, if her character was awful, she still did not deserve to be killed by the police in the middle of the night without a trial, without a jury. That is not how this works. So even though we have to take mourning for times like that, we still have to find hope. Educate yourself. Find um, a spiritual sense of peace so that you can get into this battle. Take breaks from the battle. You need a break periodically, right? All of us who are out in the community working, you got to get a break. You got to step back. You got to refresh yourself. You got to get perspective. You got to get poured into. But then you get back out and you go fight. And so I would say that that is what we've got to do. Educate yourself. Make sure you stay inspired, but continue to fight because what choice do we have but to continue to try to press justice? We either have the choice of pressing towards justice or giving up altogether. And I choose to press towards justice. VoteSmart.org, ontheissues.org, ballotready.org, Chicago Board of Elections.org. Those are all wonderful websites to start with to begin to educate yourself. I'll be speaking at Elmhurst College this week, in Inglewood this week. I'm doing a bunch of classes at Kennedy King College. I'll be speaking for the Chicago Church of Christ this week. I'll be speaking at Oakdale Covenant Church next week. And you can follow any of those things if you want. I just want to help guys help in the revolution and make sure that people are empowered to take advantage of that right that people died for, which is the right to vote. And that's why I do what I do. That's why you do what you do. That's why many people out there do what they do. But that ought to inspire us to keep on going. People died, people fought, so we'd be here. We can't give up hope.
I love it. I love it, love it. I think that's just a perfect way for us to end, you all. Thank you for watching our segment, State of Emergency, Your Voice, Your Vote, Your Life. I really, really hope that you took away some nuggets from this conversation. I know that I did. Even in preparation for next week, like some research I need to do. I want to make sure that everything that I do, I'm informed. Decisions I make impact my child, impacts his children. I think we need to realize we're in this for the long game. And if we're in it for the long game, then we want to make sure that we are making decisions that we know are going to be progressive. Maybe not necessarily in our lifetime, but in the lifetime to come. Thank you again, Ted, for coming. I love you so much. Thank you for time, your wisdom, just your expertise. And again, as you all see at the bottom, follow Ted and his sites. You will not only be pleased on the political side, but also on the artistic side. Take care, you all, and we will tune in with you next time. Bye.
God bless you. Thank you, guys.